it's a good point to re-mention that support system, that it's so important to either, if it's lacking, to build that up, and if it's there already in place, to also recognize that.
Yeah.
Because it's so fundamental. I would say, just to come back what you mentioned earlier, that you said that the fear of actually moving on might be more than the fear of doing the purging itself. In my experience, it seems like we're so addicted, not just to substances, but to the thought processes or thought patterns itself of having something, having PTSD, having trauma, having the known, everything what we're known to, and just to fall back into that. And of course there's also the difficulty that certain people you still have to deal with, like your brother or your mother or your sister, that are part of your issues, that are part of your traumas. So to how can you reframe the relationship that's not based on the past and go into a new direction?
Yeah. And the irony in that is that for as much as people, badger, encourage, or otherwise push people to change because they don't like the way that they are, they're very often they're not willing to let go themselves of the things, or let the people let go of who they supposedly are.
Right. That's interesting what you just say. Yeah.
No, well, you may have been walking around for years with the trauma labeled on you, but now that you want to take it off, I'm going to make sure you don't forget that you were awful and you were crazy and you were all of these things.
Right.
And, part of it is that we have no social or cultural mechanism for dealing with this stuff. Like, we don't really, in small communities maybe, but like people like us, I'll go weeks without seeing another human being here in Santa Fe, and then all of a sudden be stuck in the middle of a group of them, on a shoot, and then back and forth. And when I went through all of this stuff, like, I had friends, I had community and all of this stuff, but I gotta tell you, like, maybe just a few, couple, actually gave, me any time or attention or support on any level that helped.
Right.
Almost everybody else disappeared,
Right.
And then there was, of course, a small minority that was, always ready and willing just to continue to point out as many negative aspects, faults, mistakes, or things, as if, they didn't really understand or care that bad things were happening, and I was trying to get through them, and I was struggling really hard.
Okay.
All of the old judgments and moralizing, all of that comes back. I had a serious, very temporary, about 4 months at most, but a pretty serious drug relapse for the first time in 15 odd years.
Okay.
I was, at the time, I was just done. I was not really interested in being present in my mind anymore. And I would have done anything to get out of the pain I was in. So going back to drugs is the most logical and understandable thing for somebody to do in serious crisis. And after 15 odd years of working in drug addiction and reform and recovery and policy and all this stuff, you would think that people would be ready and willing to help when you're in that position. No. Okay. I was judged and condemned by most in the same way that I was when I was 19 and I first started this addiction.
Right.
That was the most surprising part of it all. That was when I really realized, wow, I'm really not going to get out of this unless I pull myself out.
Okay. Right.
No one's going to do this for me.
Right. It shows again how big the stigma still is on mental, emotional issues.
Yeah.
How quick we are with our judgments and how it affects us.
Yeah, and there were actually people that would bring up things that I had said in the intervening 15 years about when people would ask me, like, how, like, I would say that addiction was something that you could get over, that there wasn't, that you weren't, this old disease model was not valid, that you weren't, an addict or an alcoholic for the rest of your life and all that stuff. And instead of people kind of wanting to understand why I would, go back to something like that, and instead what they're more interested in is like, oh, well, you're a hypocrite. You said that you got this, you got over this, or you said that it was this way, and then you went and did this, and how am I supposed to believe any of this that you said before? And trying to explain that it's this large organic process, like the spectrum of severity, and that, waxes and wanes over time. It's like you're just talking to a wall,
Yeah. I find it interesting that you put it in your own terms, because I see it, of course, more from a professional side, or from as a therapist, that there's cycles that we go through. There's cycles of healing, and there's cycles of relapses as well. And there's just other stresses that come into your life, and things that happen that don't necessarily have to be related to your past trauma, but are also upsetting, and that kind of put you back into a stress mode where you might reach out again to some of your habits that you formed already earlier, your addiction patterns. And addiction patterns to me can be anything. It could be drugs, it could be drink, it could be intensive sports, it could be intensive yoga even, and in an unhealthy way. We can just, whenever we go through a stress period where we feel overwhelmed again, we might slip back into that again till we have a sense of containment.
For sure. Yeah, especially when people don't feel safe or secure in their lives or surroundings.
Right.
And that, that I think was have you read, are you familiar with Bruce Alexander? Have you ever read any of his work? He's a Canadian doctor. He wrote The Globalization of Addiction.
Right.
I'm sure you're familiar with Gabor Mate.
Yeah, I read his book. Yeah.
Gabor Mate takes all of his stuff, everything, his whole framing of addiction, he gets all of that from Bruce Alexander.
Oh, really? Okay.
And Bruce Alexander and him were colleagues, and Bruce kind of wrote all of these new ideas. Gabor was the one who really kind of popularized them.
Right.
But Bruce was the historian and the researcher. Gabor was working, directly with addicts in the clinics. And together they kind of brought this whole, dislocation theory. And this idea of disconnection being at the root of addiction, not disease or genetics or anything like that. I really got to understand that intimately over the last year when I was pretty much isolated, during that downward spiral. And had I been connected, I am almost certain that I would have had some kind of, boundaries on it.
Right.
People knew what was going on, and they, if I was regularly having to be connected with people, I think I might not have gone as deep as I did.
Right. Okay. How's it for you to be working with people who are actively suffering from trauma, like the vets you went to South America with, or other projects that you're doing?
At first, I didn't really understand what I was getting involved in. I didn't understand how much I was taking on. So the first 2 documentaries I made afterwards, I had, these epic physical and mental collapses from taking on so much of the trauma of the subjects. Plastic People was a really dangerous shoot anyway, so there was also additional, traumatic stuff after that. Hold on just a second here. My door keeps popping open, and I just wanted to open it up here.
Sure.
So then with At Home in the Dark, I have to admit that, that whole project started pretty much the week my sister committed suicide, and it didn't really stop until I went to check myself into Crossroads last year. So that's like 3 straight years where I'm trying to execute a project and, do all the interviews, all the travel, and then put it all together, while at the same time I'm going through a series of very powerful shocks that did not really start to manifest or come out until later.
Okay.
So the whole process of it was fraught with, imagine if it was just a bucket of everybody's shit dumped together. I didn't know what was mine and what was other people's. And then when you're trying to do a documentary about traumatized people, you're going to have a spectrum of people in that group that are anywhere from severe to borderline, right?
Yeah.
And so I had a number of borderlines, about 4 of them in the project that, oh goodness gracious, they're exhausting. They're exhausting. And it just drew me into just these epic dramas, all of this conflict and all of this, splitting and all of the shit that goes on with all of that. Yeah, that's better. So
again, it could go both ways, because I seen the trailer and you met with really interesting people as well that are in the field of trauma, working with trauma, doing interviews with them. And I see many people who have gone through something, what they call also the wounded healer. They start with being hurt and then put themselves on the path of either becoming a therapist or setting up a Facebook page or becoming a provider for other people. So hence my question to
I worry about that a lot. I've seen a lot of the worst possible outcomes of the wounded healer.
I know.
All over here, all over the West Coast.
Right, I know.
Like by the millions.
I know it's worrisome to some degree, and then also, I mean, to some point you have to respect that people are going or moving in their healing process, and they're attracting what they need to attract, and they're getting a feedback from that, either negative or positive, or what they need to learn.
Yeah.
But also it can be overwhelming again, as you said yourself, working with people who are somewhat borderline or having their own things going on.